So, the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of simplicity. And within that, the first thing that I think we're kind of burdened with sometimes as presenters is something called the curse of knowledge. Because, you know, we'll talk in a bit more detail about this 10,000 hours rule, but, you know, 10,000 hours rule, by the time you've done 10,000 hours worth of deliberate practice, you tend to be pretty good at the subject. You tend to know it inside out. You tend to know what the questions will be, who the examiner is, what the style is, you know, the kind of questions that will come your way from the students. It's unusual, you know, that you then get sort of flummoxed by something coming straight out of left field. And therefore, you know it all, and we tend to think this is so simple. And I know Serge was talking the other night, you were saying that, you know, you used a BA1 lecturer to cover your AAT. You shouldn't have to do that, it's such a simple subject. But, you know, sometimes I think putting it the other way, when you teach the very low-level subjects, they're sometimes the most difficult ones to teach, because you've got someone who's coming to you fresh with absolutely no knowledge whatsoever. And something like the debits and the credits, bookkeeping always thinks like learning a foreign language. And, you know, if you wouldn't teach someone French by just having a French person honky hard talk at them for hours and hours and hours and hours. But that's kind of what we do, isn't it? We use a fully qualified accountant to whom debits and credits are a second language, and we talk at somebody who, you know, what the hell is a debit in the first place? We may as well be telling them to land a rocket on the moon. And so sometimes it's a case of kind of stepping back. And there's a great analogy here. Tony, what I would like you to do is, you remember the tune? I'd like you to tap out a tune for me. Anyone recognise the tune? National Anthem, God Save the Queen. Why didn't you stand up?
Stop too quickly.
That's quite an interesting experience. Tony, in fact, is one of the best tappers we have within the organisation, which is why...
The best, I think.
But there is a story behind this. Psychological experiment going back a few years or so now, and there were two groups. Half the group were told to be tappers, and the other half of the group were told to be listeners. The tappers were told to tap out a simple tune, Happy Birthday, God Save the Queen, or something which would be instantly memorable to the population. And the tappers were asked, OK, what proportion of the listeners do you think are going to hear the tune? And it's this what we were talking about yesterday, who is worse than average driver? You know, as a tapper, you tend to have belief in what you do. Tony, you can hear that tune in your head as you tap out, maestro, and 80% of tappers would say, well, you know what, the listeners will pick up on this. In practice, it's an awful lot less than that. So, you know, there's 16 in the group. 2, maybe 3 of you picked up on the tune, less than 20%. So sometimes this sort of divorce between what we perceive to be the message and therefore what the actual intended message is at the end of it. And, you know, think back to when you first present, you write everything down, don't you? And, you know, one of the reasons you write everything down is you don't necessarily know what you're going to say next. And because you write everything down, the students write everything down. And actually get a lot of benefit from that. This idea that they're consciously having to do something active will start tending to embed the memories. Obviously, as you get better and better and better, you know your subject inside out, and then you start to hold court, don't you? You tell your stories. And the students don't really know what to do about that because they can't kind of record and then tell the story in the exam. And they sit back and they listen, don't they? And they don't write anything down. And the danger is to then go home, OK, what have I actually learned today? I've got a kind of blank page of notes. I was very entertained, but I can remember the story, but I've got nothing to actually revise from. And sometimes it's worthwhile catching ourselves on, I think, and just sort of remembering what it's like to be on the other side of the audience. This idea of not burying the lead, Bill Clinton there had this sort of phrase during the 1992 presidential election of, it's the economy, stupid. And the reason behind that is that Bill Clinton, very, very, very intelligent man, was kind of all over the place in terms of his thought process. As far as he was concerned, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of different reasons why he should be elected president, and George Bush I was no good. And he'd go on chat shows and he'd say, I want to talk to you about foreign policy, I want to talk to you about the education system, I want to talk to you about the healthcare system. And he was all over the shop. And so his advisors kept coming back to this, OK, it's the economy, stupid, it's the economy, OK, you know, don't go into foreign policy. The Americans aren't too interested in that. Just keep talking about the economy, stupid. And that was his central theme. And, what he's trying to do is he's trying to get the voters, when they're actually in the voting booth, pressing the thumbs to the, whatever it was, making the cross against the paper, to have that one thought in their minds. When I'm signing off here today, how do I feel economically, financially? Am I better or worse off than I was 4 years ago? And that's what I should base my vote on. And again, this is something I think we're kind of guilty of, because we'll say this bit's important, this bit's important, this bit's important. And you can't really go down the route of saying these are 12 very important things that you have to learn. And, they may well be 12 important things, but sometimes I think an element of prioritisation has to come in. So do we have a central theme in our presentation? That's what we should stick to. And just sort of coming back to metaphor, I just like this one because this is a fantastic metaphor. You've seen the film Speed. Now, can you imagine that, you are the director, the kind of creator of Speed, and you need to get that off the drawing board. You're going to have a lot of difficult meetings with Hollywood people. And, they're going to say, well, what's the film about? And you're going to say, well, there's this guy, I think he's an ex-copper or something like that, and he's a bit annoyed because I think his pension went wrong. And for reasons unknown, he's put this bomb on board this bus, and when it goes above 50 miles an hour, the bomb gets armed, and they then can't go below 50 miles an hour because then it'll go off and it'll be horrible, and someone's going to stop him. And, that's actually a lot going on. And legend has it that Speed was pitched to Hollywood using 5 words. And the 5 words were, die hard on a bus. And, all of a sudden, think about the imagery that kind of creates. I can tell that this isn't going to be an art house film. I'm not going to get an independent black and white French director to do it, am I? This is a summer blockbuster. Okay, who's the, the sort of hero going to be? Keanu Reeves, so, maybe that one didn't quite work. And, this goes on a lot. Aliens was apparently pitched as 3 words, Jaws in space, and, they say that there's only kind of 7 different story themes going through any kind of picture. So you could take any picture and say it's something in space, something at sea, but very, very, very simple.
People don't remember complicated concepts. The simpler your message is, the more remember it will be. The more rememberable it is, the more likely your audience will go away and act upon it. We have the curse of knowledge. We're experts in our fields. Try to remember the first time you came across your subject. How did you learn it? How did you break it down? How did you actually commit it to memory? By remembering what it was like as a learner, we overcome the curse of knowledge and simplify the process. Don't bury the lead. What is your key message? Make sure you ruthlessly prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. If you don't know your key message, your audience won't know the key message. And finally, try to use a metaphor, a simile, analogy, or a short story. These are the things that bind us together as a species. These are the things that we remember. Okay? Why don't you try some of these techniques with your presentation?